Well, good afternoon. I'm the low-tech guy. This is my PowerPoint. I'm Brad Lafevers, and I just want to tell y'all we've been in Georgia about 15 years now, and I truly feel like a Georgian, but we moved here from Texas, and so have a lot of Texas roots, and nobody's told a story yet today, so I'm going to tell you a story about a Texan just so you kind of get the nature of the folks you're dealing with here, and Ulf can relate after his time there, but there was this Texan, big old tall cowboy, decided he was going to go to New York for a little vacation, and he was by himself, so he goes and he's trotting around Manhattan there and just having a great time, and he decided he would take bus transportation to get around the city. So he had finished touring one of the sites he wanted to see and went up to a bus stop and waited, and sure enough the bus pulled up. Well, just before he got to the steps, this little gal steps up in front of him, and she's got on a little short leather mini skirt. So as she walks up to the bus, she gets hold of the handrails and tries to step up on the bottom step, but the skirt is just so tight she can't get her foot up there, so she reaches back to zip it down a little bit and loosen it, and tries again to step up, no avail. So she reaches back again, zip it down a little more, and one more time, and no way to get that foot up on the step. So one more time, she reaches back to zip the dress down, and about that time, two big hands get her by the waist and just set her up on the top on that first step. She turned around to the old Texan and says, "Now listen here, mister, I don't think you know me well enough to be handling me like that." And he said, "Well, ma'am, after the third time you unzipped my britches, I thought we was friends." So anyway, that's a little bit about a Texan. I want to do a couple of things here. I want to leave plenty of time for Jonathan to talk about the Cordele Inland Port and our intermodal center over there, but I did want to tell you a little bit about Atlantic Western Transportation. We are the company that owns the Heart of Georgia Railroad that runs essentially from the Alabama line to Vidalia, Georgia. If any of you have ridden the Sam Short Line, you were on the Heart of Georgia. If you're planning on taking your kids to see Thomas the Train, you'll be on the Heart of Georgia Railroad. We are basically a freight railroad. We do pull the Sam excursion train for the state of Georgia. We serve about 30 customers up and down the line. And when people ask about a short line and how does that relate and what is that, I always kind of compare it to if you fly out of Albany on the regional carrier. They'll take you to a hub, Atlanta, and there you get on the big jet to go cross country. We do essentially the same thing. We pick up and deliver traffic to customers along our rail line, take that traffic to an interchange point with either Norfolk Southern or CSX, and then it hits the main line, the big line, and goes wherever you want to go with it. So that's kind of the vehicle or the effort that we apply out here on the rail side. Another business that we have is a company called Southeast Railcar. Southeast Railcar is a rail car repair and rebuild facility. So as rail cars move about hauling freight, they get damaged or they reach a point where they need service, then those cars come to us, and we've got a shop between Americus and Plains where we do those repairs and rehabs and refurbishments on rail cars. But the real story that we're here to talk to you about today, of course, is the Cordele Intermodal Center, logistics, and growth. And you know, Tony asked a question after listening to Paige. He said, "Well, boy, this is all great and this is all good, but what about here? How does that impact us, and what do we do?" And I just want to throw out a few tidbits as food for thought here, because as folks from this region and folks who have a sincere desire to see this region grow, these are the kind of things that we collectively need to be thinking about. Paige put up 3 C's: capacity, capability, and connectivity. When a company is looking for a place to locate a business, and Jonathan can attest to this, having been to several meetings where a lot of major real estate development and economic development companies were operating. Tax abatements are great, free land is great, cheap electricity prices are great, but most of them want to know, what is my tie into the logistics system? How do I move my goods in and out of this facility economically, but efficiently? And the two go hand in hand. I mean, the first thing people will tell you is, well, the cheaper the better, and it is for anybody that's buying a service or a good. They want it as cheap as possible, but it needs to fill the bill. So how do we participate in this giant world of logistics and all of this economic development? And I've got an old saying that I coined some time back, is that industry follows infrastructure. Industry will go where infrastructure exists. Where in your mind right now, if I said name the two biggest logistics center in the state of Georgia, where would you say? Not today. Atlanta, Savannah. That's where the infrastructure resides. That's where the industries look. Now, we all are involved in some way in economic development. I was talking to Winston earlier, and he's got prospects in Lee County. You talk to most economic developers around, they've got prospects in their counties. But what are we selling? What are we putting on the table for these folks outside of, hey, we got a good workforce, we got some tax incentives, we can get you some cheap land, and boy, our electricity rates are really cheap. That's all well and good, but how do they tie into the state, national, and world logistics system from where they're going to be located? Today, most decisions of these companies forces them to go to the two places that we down here don't want them to go, Atlanta and Savannah. And believe me, at a point, Atlanta and Savannah don't want them to come anymore. They can't build enough roads. They can't get around as it is. They're running out of land. They're driving the cost of everything straight up. So what's the alternative? Well, let's move them to Albany. Let's move them to Cordele. Let's move them to Americus. Once again, the question is, what ties us into the state, national, and world logistics system? So what we have to do, we have to be a little bit forward thinking. We have to say, we've got to get ahead of the curve on infrastructure. We have to be proactive in making sure that we have a system, not a rail part, but that we are a transportation part, be it rail, be it road. We need the complete system to attract somebody in here to make this a viable place for them to go. If you recall, Paige put up a map with dots of all the logistics providers. Now, they were scattered around all over the state, but where were the clusters? Atlanta, Savannah. If you kind of focused with your eyes, you could kind of see the I-75 corridor. There were a few more along there than there were in the outliers out there. But why are they there? Infrastructure. They're there because of the interstate. They're there because of the road rail capability, ocean capability. That's why they're there. Today, intermodal traffic is driven from the ports, import traffic is driven from the ports into population centers where the consumption is. So again, the Savannah to Atlanta connection is there. That's why you have so many logistics providers on each end of that equation. So if we're going to change the game, then what we have to do is we have to focus on new and innovative ideas to tie our area logistically to state, national, and global logistics chain. If we continue the way we are, at some point, Atlanta and Savannah will literally implode with congestion. There won't be enough places to bring new industry. Georgia's going to grow. You saw some of the statistics that Paige put up. By 2050, the number of people that are going to increase in this country, and a huge portion of those are going to come to the southeast, and a big portion of those are going to come to Georgia. But we can't just continue to build 2 major centers and leave the rest of the state out of that growth loop and that economic boon that's coming. Because a job in Atlanta is not a job in Albany. Somebody might move to Atlanta, but what are they moving to? They're just adding more to the congestion, and then they're leaving behind probably the place they love, the place they want to live, the place they want to work, but they can't do it. So what do? They don't mitigate a problem, they exacerbate a problem. And then what's left behind is not a good picture long term. So what we have to do collectively, I believe, is, and it's not today that any of you are going to go out and throw coins in a cup to build a new road. That's not going to happen. We all know what's going on with the state budgets and the federal budgets and economically. So money, as Paige mentioned, is very tight and very difficult to come by. So we have to be creative, we have to be innovative, but we have to start finding some successes so it grows on itself. We've got to be an avenue for industry to look someplace besides Atlanta and Savannah, or worse, Charleston or Birmingham or somewhere in the Virginias. We need them here, we need them in the state of Georgia, but we need them in this region. And I think when Jonathan goes through Cordele Intermodal Services, hopefully we've developed an opportunity. And that's all it is today, is an opportunity. And it's going to take everybody in this room in some level or another, if it's no more than just talking about it, but collectively we've got to create the infrastructure here that attracts the industry and business, the investment, the jobs, and the growth that we need in this part of the state for the future. Over time, I guess, when we started this, there was a sort of a vision in our head that there will be a new logistics hub in the state of Georgia. The epicenter will be Cordele, simply because of the infrastructure that does exist there today with I-75 and with 2 major railroads crossing there and the mighty heart of Georgia passing through as well. But with that infrastructure that exists, that pointed to the spot where Cordele Intermodal Services needed to look at this facility. But it's like, I always say, it's like an earthquake. There's an epicenter, and then there's the radiating rings that go out from there. Albany's in a great spot. We got connectivity with Georgia 300. Jonathan has been over here numerous times talking to potential customers and industries on how this thing may benefit them. And we think over the long pull that the radiant rings of this will fan out, and Southwest Georgia will become the new logistics hub in the state of Georgia. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Jonathan, let him kind of give you the nuts and the bolts of what's going on here, and when it's all done, then we'll answer some questions for him.
Okay, can you hear it? Okay. All right, thanks, Brad. Yeah, my name is Jonathan Lafevers. Obviously, I'm Brad's son. We have worked on this project now for many years, and Dad really was one of the original thinkers, and actually he and his business partner, Dwayne Broxman, who's another co-owner of the Heart of Georgia, hatched this concept going back almost 8 years ago. And really just as a way to try and grow business on their railroad. And so over the many years, you know, we've engaged various academic institutions like Georgia Tech to do marketing studies to really kind of get a grasp and get our arms around what type of potential is in this region. I mean, you look at it on the map and there's not a whole lot there. There's Albany, you know there's a few big shippers in that region, but as the numbers started to kind of play out and come out, it really added validity to the concept and to recognize that this is something that has great potential, and if this was approached the right way and structured the right way, what it could do for the region and for the business entity itself is really pretty substantial. This is our world headquarters. It doesn't look like a whole lot right now. It's a former mobile home sales office that we purchased from a company in Cordele that had actually gone out of business. This is on the Phase 1 site, and Phase 1 sits on about 20 acres. It's a former asphalt facility. On this site, we've built some infrastructure. You can see there a Heart of Georgia locomotive. And on the bottom right, that is our container handler. That thing is on site right now, and capabilities for what it can do. It got more working capability than our yard has space. So it's a massive machine, a very expensive machine, but it's necessary to facilitate a building like this. Some of the physical attributes, we're in Cordele. Most everybody knows where that's at. I mentioned, we're on about 20 acres, and we built a 1,500-foot unloading track into the facility. Phase 2, and this kind of relates back with Darton as well, the SPLOST vote that was passed earlier this spring. Some of that money is going to be set aside for Darton. Some of it will be set aside for the inland port facility as far as land acquisition and site work. So that Phase 2 is obviously much larger in footprint. 200 acres for a facility like ours right now is beyond overkill, but that's one of those things where where we see this thing going, you don't ever want to limit yourself, and especially not on the early onset. Obviously served by the Heart of Georgia Railroad. We keep a locomotive there on site. We have about 15 loading spots on that track, so if we have a 30-car train, we need to be able to shuttle those cars in and out. So we have our own locomotive there. We also have our own chassis on site. The chassis are the actual frames that the containers sit on when they're being pulled behind a truck. We've worked out a lease with Maersk, who's one of the larger steamship lines. They have a subgroup called DCLI, or Direct Chassis Link, and so DCLI has their chassis on site there. And then talking about the transportation infrastructure, our facility is less than a mile from I-75. 300 basically comes right to our back door, and then 280 is another 4-lane highway that comes through Cordele there. So as far as getting the containers to Cordele, lifting them onto a truck and getting them to the final delivery spots, there's good road infrastructure there to make that happen. You can see here too, and I'll try to point it out a little bit, this thing will work. This is the Heart of Georgia line that comes into Cordele. As you head out this way, it goes to Vidalia, Georgia, out here. This is CSX. They come out of Waycross, and CSX and Heart of Georgia actually have an interchange right in downtown Cordele. This is important to note. Initially, this whole site was planned to be out on the west side of town, but CSX, thought it would be a good idea for them to have access to this facility, and so one of the reasons it got moved is now this wedge has been formed down here. So the plan is to build a crossover track between the two railroads. So from an operational standpoint, just with the Heart of Georgia and CSX, it gives them additional capacities, and it actually traverses right across where the Phase 2 site is, which is right here. Chris County went ahead and optioned this land out here to protect it from, obviously investors that might come out there and try and ramp up the price. So that's good. If new industry is looking to move into town, that land has been secured, and it's right there where it needs to be. This is a rail map that's, like I said, a lot of people are not really sure where the Heart of Georgia runs. The Heart of Georgia is in red right here. I think the battery's dying. It runs from the Alabama state line over to Vidalia and then turns north. So at Vidalia, the Heart of Georgia has an interchange with another railroad called Georgia Central. Georgia Central runs from Savannah up to Vidalia and actually up to Macon. So an interchange takes place, and they haul it the rest of the way. In Savannah, we use CSX to get off of the Port of Savannah. To move containerized freight onto or off of the port, it's either CSX or Norfolk Southern. So CSX made the most operational sense as far as the type of yard and their track layout in Savannah. So that's who we got our agreements with. This just kind of shows the mileage, and I think this is important to note, and kind of going back to those Georgia Tech studies. For an inland port to be successful, it needs to be a certain geographic distance from the inland port, and that range can vary with fuel prices. It can range depending on where the shippers are located. But for right now, at $3.83 on-road diesel, that's a good mileage to be away from the Port of Savannah. And going back to why Cordele, it's just in the right spot. It's one of those things where, you know, if you were to add up all the different things in the equation and put your finger on a map, you know, Cordele would be the spot that it would be. This is something, I gave this presentation actually to a shipper last week, and the plant manager let me know that, you know, a lot of our executive level folks aren't all that, you know, logistics savvy or transportation savvy. So, you know, don't be afraid to use some very lay terms. So I wanted to address them. What is an inland port? You know, more often than not, it's a rail served facility that acts as a transfer point for the containers to move from rail to truck. Brad mentioned earlier, you know, typically an inland port is going to be in a large population center. It's about expediting the movement of a large amount of goods that are coming inbound to a consumption market. Cordele is a little bit bass-backwards in that regard because it is so export heavy. It's all agricultural products. The population centers are not there. I mean, Albany is the closest one to us with any real mass. So what we have to do is be very good on the trucking side of things, because what we want to be able to show the owner of the container, which are the steamship lines, is that into our market there's balance. Containers move in as loads and they also move out as loads. That's important to know, because if they see that it's extremely export heavy, they're going to be, you know, a little bit more reluctant to move that asset down there, maybe just as an empty, to have it be sitting in Cordele, or vice versa. So like I said, you're an inland port, it's about getting the containers off the deep water port and moving them to their consumption site. Another thing that was a little bit some misnomers about our facility, and I said this is long-term strategic plans. We do not have customs on site today. That is something that we will work towards, and the gentleman that presented earlier this morning mentioned that. That's a real key ingredient for a lot of shippers, because, you know, once their container has cleared customs, generally that means that billing can take place, they can get their money. It's considered to be in the port. So once that happens, that can be a big thing from a cash flow and operational perspective. And then a foreign trade zone, now this is going to be for people that import goods instead of finished products. There are duties that they have to pay to import finished goods, and so in order to incent manufacturing in the United States, they are not going to charge you the same amount of taxes to import wheels and tires as they would a completed automobile. So establishing an FTZ zone, while it can be a physical, you know, perimeter and layout, an FTZ is actually it's a method of, it's paperwork. I mean, it's you know, it's a process that you do, that manufacturers use to reduce the amount of import duties they pay for their raw materials. And what is CIS? Cordele Intermodal Services. You know, we wanted to throw Cordele in there because a lot of people, you know, if they're from Virginia, don't know where Cordele is at. So to really kind of designate on the map where we're located. In intermodal services, I mean, although our core business is hauling containers back and forth to Savannah via rail and then lifting them and putting them on truck, you know, we offer a bunch of different services that shippers look for, steamship lines look for, freight forwarders are going to look for. You know, so we are the company that owns and operates this facility. So like I said, in addition to doing the international freight containers, you know, we also have these other services that we do. And a lot of these services have come from us being out there and meeting with shippers. You know, you ship international freight containers, but what else do you do? Well, I truck a bunch of stuff up to Atlanta. Could you help me in that regard? I'm always looking for additional warehouse space. You know, packaging is an issue for me. You know, so because we're a new company, we're young and want to think that we're nimble and entrepreneurial at spirit. You know, we have gone to these companies and said, look, we're a clean slate. If you can think of different services that we could bring to you that would bring value to your supply chain or value to what you're doing, we're all ears. I mean, we'll listen to anything. If it's something that we can do better than the way you're doing it, you know, we can make a nickel at it and save you some money, you know, why not? Let's talk about it. And here's just kind of a high level of the services offered. Obviously the Dre Service, now this is, you know, hauling international freight containers to and from the Port of Savannah to Cordele and lifting those things on the truck. And so I mentioned one-stop shop on there. CIS has contracts with all the different railroads I identified earlier, and also contracts with the trucking companies that haul from Cordele to the final destination. So when a shipper comes to me, he asks me for a rate. I'm going to give him a single number that's going to be, you know, basically a conglomeration of those other factors that the other companies have provided to me. And so we are then the single point source for all billing. If there's ever any claims issues, etc., you know, we are kind of we're the freight broker. And so, like I said, we just use a hybrid. We use two different modes in order to handle our brokerage. The truck brokerage is something, like I said, that really kind of came out of talking to a lot of these shippers. You may have a guy that exports 200 containers a year, but he trucks out 2,000 truckloads a year. And you're going, wow, I'd like to be in that business. So how can I get involved with that? So the inland port and the international freight containers for us really have served as a portal to get into some different industries, because it's a unique service, and so they want to know more about that. And so, you know, we get in the door and we introduce and you know, show them what that service means. But then we start listening. We start listening to different things that, you know, they struggle with. And truck brokerage is a big part of that. Container storage, this is going to have to do with the steamship lines, and I'll get into more of these individually. Cross-docking and warehousing, we ourselves don't own a warehouse right now. We don't do any cross-dock, but there are facilities there in Cordele that do that stuff, and actually some very large facilities do that stuff. So that's good for us. The network is bigger. You know, if somebody calls me up and says, what do you do in the warehousing arena? Well, I don't do anything, but my next door neighbor has 700,000 square feet, and she does it all right now. So I can give you a rate for the transportation. I can give you her number when it relates to warehousing. And then specialty equipment loading, that's something too that has just kind of come out from, you know, talking to customers and then looking to see what we might do or be able to offer to them. So the first one I'll talk about is the integrated Dre service. You know, it's basically what it is. You're using a combination of two modes to accomplish a similar goal to a truck, with increased efficiencies and obviously, hopefully, with cost savings. I mentioned the rail and truck contracts and how we're the single point source for that service. You know, really what you're trying to do right now is you're trying to replace truck miles with rail miles. So as an example, you know, Cordele is 180 miles inland approximately from the Port of Savannah. You know, now you might be going from 180 truck miles to 175 rail miles and 5 truck miles. So what that allows you to do is several different things. Obviously, you know, we feel like our base rates are going to be lower than what a truck's going to charge, because, you know, we're not as susceptible to fuel fluctuations going up and down. Our fuel surcharge is going to be much lower than that of a trucking company. And really, like I said, all this has come about because of the rising energy costs. What's kind of ironic about this is when they hatched this idea 8 years ago, it probably wouldn't have worked. But as fuel prices went up, as different market shifts took place, you know, really some serendipity started to come into play. And so for today, for us to open this thing up, and like I said, I check diesel prices every morning. This is the right time and it's in the right place. And so it's really exciting for us to realize that we've gotten here. Like I said, it's been a lot of hard work, but there's been a lot of luck in this thing too. The efficiencies and cost savings, I mean, this is what you're going to want to talk to somebody, because they're going to say, why? Why should I use your service? It's about money, obviously, on the front end. I mean, we think our base rates are lower. Our fuel surcharges are quite a bit less. Today, our fuel surcharge is, I think, 12.5%. A typical trucking company is going to be, right now, anywhere from 27 to 35%. And it's not because they're greedy or they're trying to make more money. It's just they're stuck with that. I mean, they have to buy the diesel. You know, it's not as an efficient mode of transportation as a rail, because you're putting dozens of truckloads behind one diesel engine. And so, you know, the savings there can be very great. Reduce fuel surcharge exposure, and this is something that kind of plays back to where, too, you know, our fuel surcharge today is 12%. You know, we have issues like you've got a conflict over in Libya, and diesel prices spike from $3.50 to $3.95 overnight. So a truck fuel surcharge may go from 22% to 36% in a day. So if you're the transportation manager for the shipper, you're trying to forecast every day and every year what your transportation costs are going to be. Because you have these wild fluctuations in fuel price when using that single mode, you know, it makes your job a lot more difficult. At the end of the year, they might be coming to you and going, well, geez, you weren't even close on this stuff. Well, I didn't know that Libya was going to have a civil war, you know, the third month of the year. So what this does, because our fuel surcharge, it doesn't even start until $3 a gallon. And obviously it goes beyond that. Our fuel surcharge still moves, but it doesn't move as much. And so it takes out a certain level of variance as these forecasters are trying to put together what their transportation costs are going to be for the year. And one of the things that we try and sell to them as well is when we establish a base rate, you know, there are obviously things that can change, but we try and establish a base rate that we feel like we can be comfortable with for 6 months, 9 months, 12 months. We're going back to that forecaster. You know, now they've got some known quantities. They've got an idea of where it would be on the low side and where it could get to on the high side. And like I said, there's just not as much variance over just a pure truck move. Little no chassis fees. Like I said, we have 50 chassis on site right now, and the lease agreement that we were able to structure with that company, we only pay for the chassis as we use them. One of the ways we're able to do that is by installing and implementing IT systems that keep up with all the in-gate, out-gate movements, lift movements and everything. So we're not an IT black hole. The owners of the assets know the status of their assets. They know how long they've been sitting. They know where they're moving to. So that becomes for us, a very powerful negotiating tool. And so now we only pay for our chassis as we use them. What does that mean for the shipper? A shipper today, if they haul a container across Maersk, CMA, or Hapag-Lloyd, no longer do they get a chassis free of charge. In years past, if you booked a container to come into your facility, the chassis was provided by the steamship line. Well, as a measure of cost savings, the steamship lines are selling off their chassis fleets. And so what happens is a shipper calls a trucking company and says, I've got a container in Savannah that needs to be picked up and brought to Cordele, Georgia. That trucker now has to go to a lot and rent a chassis, go get their container and haul it over here. Those chassis fees range today from $16 to $24 per day, and more often than not there's a 3-day minimum. So you've got your base rate and your fuel surcharge, and now you start getting the line items on the bottom of the page that a trucker has to charge you because he's being charged. Because our customers are so close to our facility, we can turn that chassis multiple times in a day. So my chassis cost for the day per container might be $2. And so as a marketing, way and way of going in here, chassis fees are, there's 3 that don't provide them today, and I guarantee you at this time next year, most of the steamship lines in Savannah will not provide chassis. It's a market shift that's taken place. So, that's something that's going to continue to increase in importance. And, for us, I can go to the guy and say, well, look, I might be $20 more expensive on the base rate, but there's no chassis fee, so I'm saving you $75 on your chassis. Because, too, we're so close, we try and reduce the amount of overweight permits that the truckers are going to have to get to haul the stuff back and forth. And really for the shippers, and we have a cotton consolidator right there in the industrial park, she won't have any over the weight load restrictions because there are no road miles. Her facility backs up right to our back door, so she can load that container as heavy as she wants. So the incremental gains that she gets, she might go from shipping 40 containers now to 35 containers because those 35 are loaded that much more heavy. This gives you a pretty good idea of where we try and target our service, and to be frank, anything up in here is probably pretty ambitious. But the Atlanta market is so big, and there are a lot of shippers out there that just don't have a good grasp on their transportation. They call a trucking company, the first one that says, I'll take the load. They don't know what the price is. They're ignorant to what the market rate would be. And so there are some up there that I think, that we can probably capture. And as we grow this thing too, and the efficiencies increase, that this becomes more realistic up in this area. But I would say that right now, Columbus and South, all of this area, this is market that we target right now. We work very closely with the Port Authority and obviously with Georgia Tech to find out what's moving into and out of this area. And on the next slide, I'll show you here a little bit about that market attribute. Obviously it's Southwest Georgia, Alabama, and Florida, but this is a balanced market today. It's a balanced market today through the Port of Savannah. So that's important when you go talk to these steamship lines and they start saying, well, why should I have my asset in Cordele? And I'm going, look, let me show you some facts that we can give you right now. This is a balanced market, and they look at Cordele on the map and they say, well, geez, there's nothing even down there. Well, within 40-mile radius, and our friends from Miller Coors are here, between those guys and a couple others, there's over 50,000 containers within a 40-mile radius of Cordele. You wouldn't know that by looking on the map, and until you start to get down to some of the lower layers of what the market's actually comprised of. So that's important. That's important to shippers, even if they're not big shippers, because what it shows is that our potential and our growth potential is out there to where, eventually we're going to be running a train a day. So even if you only ship 1 container, well, that's okay. I'm already pulling 47 today. You can be the 48th container. With the railroads have less of a burden then, there's a kind of a known service, and so that's important to know that, like I said, that this is not just a total wasteland out here. There is quite a bit of containerized volume that moves out of our area. Truck brokerage, I mentioned it, and what this does for us, obviously this is more on the domestic side. So a guy ships stuff to Atlanta, he ships stuff to Birmingham, and the same thing too. Maybe he's overwhelmed with his transportation, he doesn't have time to shop the rates. He picks up the phone, the first trucker that says, yeah, I'll do it, that's the one that gets the load, and he probably paid $300 too much. So where they can now turn those loads over to us, and we can actually get out there and shop those things. We can get out there and vet the different companies that might be showing up. And like I said, going back to the security issue, that's going to be an increasingly important thing because you have some very high value goods get loaded up in a container or in a 53-foot van. We don't know this guy from Adam. He just gave us a rate and he's here, so he's got it. So really kind of being that buffer between the shipper and their customer. What that does for us, the positioning strategy for CIS is we have the goal of becoming the kind of the all-encompassing transportation provider to anybody, any shipper. Yeah, you do some international freight containers, but you also do some domestic shipments. You're looking for warehousing, you're looking for, whatever it is. This is one of the ways that we're going to kind of get in here and try and help you out. And then obviously the benefits, lower cost and less to manage. The flip side of this is that if that shipper realizes that they're paying too much in freight, well, it might mean hiring another person in the transportation department. Do we want to spend another $50,000 or $60,000 a year to have another transportation professional in here when we can outsource this, save the same amount of money, and not have the headache? Container storage and chassis service, and this is something too that's really important. And like I said, free is free, but it's one of the things too that we're going to do in order to incent the steamship lines to move containers to our facility. Right now, the steamship lines, when you go by the Port of Savannah and you see the they're stacked 7 high, the empty containers, those steamship lines are paying on average about $3.50 per day per container that's sitting out there. So, while the money may not be huge on a daily basis, if you've got 5,000 containers sitting out there, average on a day, that's 15 grand a day they're paying in storage. So, as a way for us to kind of get our toe in the door a little bit, we can say, look, just ship 200 of them out here, ship 100 of them out here, ship 20. Let us show you that we'll find loads for those containers, and we'll make better use of that asset. It's not going to get buried 7 deep in an empty container stack, because our ultimate goal with the steamship line is to become a CY, or a container yard, and that means that we are an established drop point. So even if the containers aren't moving to our facility by our rail service, if they come in by truck and that trucker is looking for a place to drop, he can drop that empty container and chassis with us. It increases their efficiencies because now that trucker can go find something else to haul. And so really just becoming part of the network, and that's going to be great, and especially for us because we are so export heavy in our immediate area, getting those empty boxes moved out there without having to pay to get them moved out there. And so the way you do that is one, finding the imports, but two, becoming part of a network where you could be a drop facility. One of the things that you have to do if you're going to be storing containers is you have to be certified to inspect those containers, to repair them if they come in damaged, if they need cleaning, because more often than not a shipper will reject a container if it's got contaminants in it, there's bolt holes hanging out or whatever it is, so that we can be then kind of the one-stop shop for that stuff. We can go in there and say, look, we can inspect the stuff. Brad mentioned the repair car shop. They have a mobile truck that can come out there, repair those containers. So going back to building that network, what needs to exist for an inland port to really be there? You have to have all these things. Customs is going to be really important, is going to be a huge value addition, and the foreign trade zone will be as well. And so that's why those things are already being worked on today, even though they might be 2 years down the road before they're realities. We recognize that if you're going to call yourself an inland port, you have to have a little bit of everything, and if you don't, that may cost you a sale. And I mentioned the captive chassis pool. This is something that's, it's important today. Next year it'll be more important, and the next year when no steamship lines offer chassis at all, we're ahead of the curve on this deal. And I did put in there, except triaxles. Triaxles are a triple axle trailer. They are extremely expensive, and right now a shipper probably pays on average about $150 per day for a triaxle. We will have triaxles on site. We will not charge $150 a day. What that number will be significantly less, but that's something that we'll have as well. And then finally, kind of the warehousing, cross-docking, and kind of everything else. We ourselves don't own warehouses today. Like I said, there is a lot of warehouse infrastructure in Cordele. There are a lot of companies that are looking to come to Cordele and build warehouse infrastructure. I think part of that is what the feedback they get from us. I would say that 30% of the calls that I get from shippers, whether they be importers or exporters, their first question is, what's your price? And their second question is, do you have a warehouse? I mean, warehousing is critical, and most of the warehousing infrastructure right now, and going back to Brad's comment, where is the infrastructure? It's in Savannah. So stuff today that might be produced down here is put in a regular 53-foot van to go sit in a warehouse in Cordele to be loaded into a container. So why can't we shift that stuff back to Cordele? Why can't we add that infrastructure here? We can do it cheaper. The labor rates are less down here, and that's when it starts to matter about land incentives, tax incentives, different things like that. Because now we've got a transportation service that gets it to Savannah for less cost. So if you can do business out here and have a lesser transportation cost, and it's efficient and it works, that really increases the value of the area and incents these companies to move down and start looking at Cordele and Southwest Georgia as a viable option to Atlanta or Savannah. I mentioned specialty equipment handling. You know, obviously a lot of the stuff that happens down here is ag-based. There's a lot of that stuff that goes on. So that may or may not go into a container. That may go into a flat rail car. But those are different services that we're willing to offer, and just anything we feel like we can bring value to the supply chain equation for these shippers. And I mentioned a clean slate. I mean, this is a young company. You know, it's exciting for us to go out there and say, well, no, we don't do that. We're willing to look at anything. You know, we're willing to look out there and go and find a way to make money and find a way to make these shippers better at what they do. Brad mentioned any questions. I mean, hopefully we got some, but you know, overall, this thing is something that our market today is really kind of within that 40 or 50 mile ring of Cordele. We want to empower shippers that are here now to give them another alternative to get their containers to and from Savannah, to broker their truckloads, and really make them more competitive in a global market. And if you're a shipper out there that has not gotten into that game because you're a little bit reluctant, you know, there may be some fears, some reservation, you know, now you're dealing with a local company. We can come sit down and have lunch with you. You know, you're not calling freight forwarder up in Atlanta or whatever it is. I know we got some freight forwarders in here, but you know, this is about kind of that personal touch, and I think most of you, if you're from this area and own businesses, you know, that's something that we kind of come to expect down here. You know, we want to know who we're doing business with. And so for us to be really kind of a global company that's providing that local touch, I think that makes us very unique in the marketplace, and really, you know, I think it makes it very exciting for us to be able to provide that service to these companies.